Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined. They're real. When a decorated wildlife officer was found shot dead in his front yard, it seemed like a tragedy rooted in personal grief. But within 12 hours, two more bodies surfaced, his sister-in-law and his wife. Only one person walked away alive, and when he spoke, the truth tore through the silence like gunfire. May 3rd, 2024. Pulaski County, Kentucky. A Friday evening shaped like any other. Clear skies, trimmed yards, the steady quiet of a rural community preparing for the weekend. At 6:47 p.m., a call came into Pulaski County Dispatch. The caller, a neighbor named Dolores Wren, stated in an uneasy whisper, "There's a man in the backyard. He's not moving." She didn't elaborate, didn't need to. Law enforcement units were dispatched within 90 seconds. Deputies arrived at the Gosser residence just outside Somerset less than 10 minutes later. The body of 73-year-old Larry Gosser was found sprawled face down in the freshly cut grass behind his home. A single bullet wound to the back of the head. There was no blood spatter on the surrounding surfaces, only a clean entry wound, suggesting close range. No casings were found nearby, no drag marks, no signs of a scuffle, just death. Plain, deliberate, and silent. Larry had retired more than a decade prior after serving with the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife. He was known locally for his discipline, his methodical thinking, and his blunt integrity. A man of habit and order, he was rarely out of reach and never late for evening check-ins with his siblings. So when one of his brothers hadn't heard back from him by sunset, that gut instinct, the one shaped by years of knowing someone's routine, started to hum. That instinct would be validated within the hour. The backyard scene appeared deceptively tranquil. A lawn chair slightly tipped, a hose coiled neatly. His pickup truck was still in the driveway, keys inside. Inside the home, deputies found no forced entry, no signs of burglary, no disruption. On the dining table, a half-finished meal, two plates, one chair pushed out slightly. The lights were off, save for the dim glow of a hallway lamp. The home looked recently lived in, but the atmosphere was brittle, uneasy. Angela Gosser, Larry's wife of nearly 4 decades, on again, off again since a 2009 separation and later reconciliation, was notably absent. Her handbag, keys, and phone were also missing. None of her friends or neighbors had seen or heard from her since the previous afternoon. No notes, no messages, no known medical appointments or trips planned, and no digital footprint since 5:33 p.m., when her phone last pinged a tower 5 miles north. Inside the bedroom closet, investigators found a locked metal box that contained a .38 special revolver registered in Angela's name. The gun was missing. The box had not been tampered with, just opened with a key that was no longer there. The weapon had been in that house for over 20 years, and as noted by Larry's nephew during a later interview, Angela had been trained in how to use it. The initial report to Kentucky State Police flagged the death as suspicious, not yet labeled a homicide pending autopsy results. But few in the responding team were under any illusions. A retired law enforcement officer shot in the back of the head in his own yard did not fit the profile of an accident nor a suicide. There was no powder residue on Larry's hands, no firearm near his body. He didn't even carry a pistol regularly anymore. By 8:30 p.m., the coroner had confirmed death by gunshot wound to the cranium, close range, likely from a revolver. There were no defensive wounds, no signs he saw it coming, no hesitation. One shot, executed with efficiency. By 9:10 p.m., law enforcement issued a "Be on the lookout" notice statewide for Angela Gosser, describing her as a person of interest. Not yet a suspect, not yet charged. Just a name attached to a body and a vanishing act. Her vehicle, a silver 2012 Chevrolet Malibu, was also missing. The digital data available at that point was limited. The Gossers' home did not have smart security, no doorbell camera, no motion sensors. But one neighbor, approximately 300 yards west, had a low-resolution driveway camera angled toward their gravel road. When investigators reviewed the footage from 5:48 p.m., they spotted what appeared to be Angela's vehicle slowly leaving the property. Alone. No one followed. No taillights seen after that. Forensics secured the crime scene. The only fingerprints on the back door's handle belonged to Larry and Angela. No sign of forced entry. No muddy prints. No latent blood transfer in the hallway. The grass beneath Larry's body had not yet browned. He had been dead less than 2 hours. The rest of the house? Cold, undisturbed, still. From an investigative standpoint, the case had begun with a clean kill, a missing spouse, and a vacuum of information. The kind of start that either unravels fast or not at all. But there was a problem. One of the detectives later phrased in his report, "The data aligned too cleanly." Sometimes that was the problem. Nothing seemed off. And in homicide work, that was rarely a good sign. Back at the station, officers reviewed Angela's history. No active warrants, no known affiliations. One closed divorce file from 2009 that mentioned mental instability and emotional volatility, with a temporary protection order requested by Larry but later dropped. They had separated for 3 years, reconciled, moved back into the same house in 2015. There had been no further reported incidents since. Interviews that night were limited. No witnesses to the shooting, no unusual vehicle activity reported, no calls made from the Gosser landline. Angela's phone went dark by 6:08 p.m. The last cell tower ping put her heading west, away from Somerset, off into Russell County, an area with little coverage and plenty of back roads. The theory forming wasn't a complex one, but it was incomplete. If Angela Gosser had pulled the trigger, then left the scene, where did she go? Was she running? Was this a murder-suicide delayed in motion? Was she even alive? And what no one had considered yet, at least not officially, was that the body count wasn't done. By 9:30 p.m. on May 3, 2024, Angela Gosser's name was officially added to the BOLO, Be on the Lookout, system statewide. There was no arrest warrant, no official charges, but the alert was flagged with priority status. Individual, possibly armed and potentially unstable. Her vehicle, a silver 2012 Chevrolet Malibu, had not triggered any traffic cameras or license plate readers within Pulaski County. That alone narrowed the direction of travel. The car had likely moved off main roads and toward the rural stretch of Russell County, where signal coverage dropped and road surveillance thinned. At 10:12 p.m., the Kentucky State Police Electronic Crime Branch began coordinating with cell service providers to request expedited tower pings. Angela's phone, a Samsung Galaxy model, had last connected to a cell tower off Highway 80 at 6:08 p.m., nearly 20 minutes after Larry Gosser's estimated time of death. The next ping attempt failed. Either the phone was powered off or damaged. That technical silence created its own type of urgency. Angela had no prior criminal record. She wasn't in any known databases beyond a 2009 civil filing, a domestic protection order filed by Larry citing verbal aggression and erratic depressive behavior. That case was withdrawn 22 days later, without incident. According to court records, Angela had briefly moved out of their shared home in late 2009, relocating to her brother's residence in Jamestown before returning 3 years later. No charges were ever filed. Investigators reviewed Angela's digital profile. She had no active social media. Her last debit card transaction was 2 days earlier, $38.10 at a local Save-A-Lot. No purchases after that. Her email inbox showed only subscription notices and promotional material. The browser history on the shared household computer revealed nothing out of place. No searches for how to disappear, poison, gunshot trauma, or death certificates. Instead, the most recent searches were for regional weather and cat flea medication. That absence of anomaly became its own kind of anomaly. It was now clear whatever happened had not been planned far in advance, at least not digitally. At 11:20 p.m., law enforcement made initial contact with members of Angela's immediate family. Her sister, Jennifer Wilson, resided near Hammond Road in Russell County. She told officers she hadn't spoken with Angela in weeks and was unaware of any recent arguments with Larry. Her tone, described later in field notes, was controlled but flat. Investigators noted that Jennifer declined to come to the scene or offer transport assistance. She did, however, confirm Angela kept a .38 special in the home. She never carried it, Jennifer said, not unless she thought someone was following her. But that was years ago. That comment prompted review of Angela's previous medical records, what little the investigators could lawfully access without a warrant. What they uncovered was limited: a 2011 intake at a behavioral health clinic in Lexington, short-term outpatient counseling, and a prescription history for anti-anxiety medication. No known hospitalizations, no suicide attempts, no violent behavior documented. At the Pulaski County scene, crime scene analysts concluded their initial sweep of the Gosser property. The most telling absence: a set of car keys was missing from the bowl by the door. The Chevrolet's fob was not inside the house, and Larry's set had not been used. His truck sat cold and untouched. Angela had left using her own keys, taking her car, phone, and possibly the .38 revolver. Forensic investigators completed GSR, gunshot residue, testing on Larry's hands. Results: negative. He had not fired a weapon that day. The entry wound behind his right ear confirmed the trajectory: a close-range shot from behind, downward angle, with no defensive marks. Likely killed while unaware. No hesitation wound. No struggle. Back at the state crime lab in Frankfurt, the bullet extracted during preliminary examination was consistent with .38 caliber rounds. Rifling marks suggested a traditional Smith & Wesson style revolver. No shell casing was recovered from the scene, expected with a revolver since spent rounds remain in the cylinder until manually removed. It was a textbook execution shot. Investigators returned to interview neighbors on the surrounding lots. One, a retired teacher named Linda Capps, mentioned seeing Angela's car leave the driveway a little before 6. She hadn't thought much of it until the patrol units arrived later. She wasn't driving fast, Capps said. Didn't look in a hurry. By 1 a.m., law enforcement officially widened the search perimeter across county lines. Surveillance requests were submitted to local businesses in nearby Jamestown and Russell Springs, including gas stations, ATMs, and convenience stores. If Angela had stopped for gas, food, or even just pulled over, it might show up on camera. The early hours of May 4th would be critical. The real concern wasn't just where she had gone, but whether she was heading toward someone. Investigators took another look at family connections. Angela's brother, Darrell Wilson, also lived in Jamestown, less than a 20-minute drive from Jennifer's house. Though not estranged, the siblings were not reportedly close. But one detail stood out in the background report. After Angela's temporary separation from Larry in 2009, she had lived with Darrell for several months. No conflicts were noted, but the proximity, history, and silence from both Jennifer and Darrell after the murder were notable. Detectives compiled a working timeline: 5:15 p.m., estimated time of Larry Gosser's death; 5:33 p.m., Angela's phone active on Wi-Fi inside the home; 5:48 p.m., vehicle resembling Angela's Malibu seen on neighbor's camera; 6:08 p.m., final phone ping on a tower westbound from Pulaski County; 7:11 p.m., no digital or physical activity traceable. It was in this void, those silent 4 hours, where law enforcement knew the next move would come. Not in data, not in forensics, but from the field. Just before dawn, a deputy in Russell County radio dispatch. A silver vehicle matching Angela's was seen parked off an unmarked gravel road near Hammond Ridge. It wasn't running. The driver's side door was ajar. Inside was Jennifer Wilson, Angela's sister, slumped against the passenger window. Dead. No movement, no engine heat, and no sign of Angela Gosser. The second body changed everything. At 5:44 a.m. on May 4th, 2024, a sheriff's deputy responding to a tip-off discovered a silver Chevrolet Malibu parked along an unmarked pull-off near Hammond Ridge Road in rural Russell County. The vehicle matched the BOLO alert issued for Angela Gosser's car. The driver's door stood partially ajar, the interior lights drained. The engine was cold. The area was unlit, heavily wooded, and several miles from the nearest paved road. Inside the vehicle, officers found the body of 57-year-old Jennifer Wilson, seated in the front passenger seat, slumped against the window. She had been shot multiple times, 2 rounds to the chest, 1 to the right temple. There were no signs of struggle, no broken glass, no shell casings recovered. The gun used was not left behind. Jennifer's purse was located in the back seat. Her ID, phone, and house keys were all accounted for. Her cell phone, however, had been powered off. When later accessed, the last outgoing message on her device was time-stamped at 4:02 p.m. the previous day, several hours before the murder of her brother-in-law, Larry Gosser. The recipient, her brother, Darrell Wilson. The message read, "Call me tonight if you can. Something's off." The positioning of the body indicated she had been shot while seated. The seatbelt was fastened, and there were no defensive wounds on her hands or arms. Blood had pooled between the seat and the door panel, partially dried. Estimated time of death placed it between 6:30 and 7 p.m., barely an hour after Larry's. The interior of the car showed no signs of forced entry, no disturbance to the dashboard, no signs of a physical altercation. Investigators determined Jennifer was likely shot at close range while seated, suggesting familiarity with the shooter or a calculated approach. The angle of entry on the headshot was downward, consistent with someone shooting from the driver's side or standing just outside the open passenger door. There was no video surveillance in the area, no security cameras along the nearby access roads. The nearest gas station camera was almost 8 miles away and showed no sign of the vehicle during the critical window between 5:50 and 7 p.m. Angela Gosser remained unaccounted for. Jennifer Wilson had not been considered a central figure in the original investigation. Her last recorded communication with her sister was over 3 weeks prior. However, interviews with extended family members revealed that tensions had existed between the two. Their mother had passed away 2 years earlier, and disagreements over property inheritance had created a lasting fracture in their relationship. A probate file reviewed from 2022 showed that Angela had disputed the sale of a family-owned plot in Jamestown, land Jennifer had overseen and later sold to a neighboring farm. The matter had not gone to court, but several letters included in the file, signed by Angela, contained accusatory language bordering on threats. Despite this, there had been no recent documented confrontations, no police reports, no domestic complaints. Nothing on paper that would indicate Jennifer felt immediately threatened. Yet her final text message, discovered just hours after her death, now took on new weight. By mid-morning, Kentucky State Police had secured the scene and towed the Malibu for forensic processing. Fingerprint dusting recovered only Jennifer's prints on the passenger side interior and steering wheel. A partial palm print was recovered from the rear door, though it was smudged and lacked sufficient points of comparison. No usable DNA was recovered from the weapon surface areas, because again, there was no weapon left behind. The crime lab reported that the bullet calibers recovered from Jennifer's body were consistent with the same .38 caliber revolver used in the Gosser homicide. Ballistic striation patterns, rifling marks, and groove measurements matched the round extracted from Larry's autopsy. Same weapon, same ammunition type, same hands likely. But the second scene wasn't as clean. Unlike the Gosser backyard, the site had footprints. 2 sets, one belonging to Jennifer, consistent with her shoe size and tread. The second, unidentified, was a woman's size, 1 size larger, with a tread pattern matching common Skechers footwear. The prints led from the driver's side of the car, curved toward the tree line, then disappeared. Tracking dogs were brought in, but by then the trail had gone cold. Deputies interviewed neighbors along Hammond Ridge. One farmer recalled hearing a sharp pop around dusk but thought it was a vehicle backfiring. No one reported seeing another person on foot. No vehicles had been reported abandoned or stolen in the vicinity overnight. The forensic timeline now had a second fixed point, 6:47 p.m., May 3. Larry Gosser found deceased in Pulaski County. 6:37 p.m., May 3. Jennifer Wilson killed in Russell County. 5:48 p.m. Angela's car recorded leaving Pulaski property. 6:08 p.m. Phone ping in transition zone toward Russell County. 5:44 a.m. May 4. Jennifer's body discovered. The proximity between the murders, both geographic and temporal, was undeniable, but there was no motive outlined clearly enough to explain the escalation. Angela's name remained on the bolo. Her photograph was released publicly that afternoon, circulated across regional news stations, and printed on roadside digital billboards. Described as possibly armed, possibly in danger, the alert remained cautious in tone. Law enforcement was still not declaring her a suspect, But that distinction was becoming thinner by the hour. Inside the KSP command post, one investigator reportedly asked aloud, "Is she running? Or just not done yet?" The possibility of additional targets was now on the table. Darrell Wilson, the last living sibling, was placed under temporary watch. Officers made contact with him at his Jamestown residence just before noon. He answered the door, cooperative, calm. Told officers he hadn't seen Angela in weeks. Said Jennifer hadn't stopped by. Volunteered his phone for inspection. No recent texts from either sister. When asked if he would be willing to come in for a formal interview, he agreed. He never made it, because within 6 hours, the third and final scene would unfold, inside his own home. At 4:52 p.m. on May 4, 2024, Kentucky State Police confirmed that Darrell Wilson, the last surviving sibling in the Gosser-Wilson family line, had voluntarily agreed to meet investigators for a follow-up interview. He had been cooperative in their initial doorstep contact, showed no hesitation during questioning, and turned over his cell phone without a warrant. Investigators left with the impression that he posed no immediate concern. By 7:10 p.m., that assumption would be overturned. A neighbor in the wooded outskirts of Jamestown, located less than a mile from Darrell Wilson's property, called 911 after hearing multiple loud bangs, followed by what was described as a woman's voice yelling in distress. Deputies were dispatched immediately. The address in question matched the one they had just visited hours earlier. Upon arrival at the Wilson residence, law enforcement found the front door partially open, the interior lights on, and signs of a struggle in the front room. A large wooden chair had been overturned. Books from a low shelf had been scattered across the hardwood floor. There was broken glass on the kitchen threshold. No signs of forced entry. No one responded to verbal calls. Inside, 2 bodies were found, one deceased, one still breathing. Angela Gosser was lying face up near the hallway entrance, gunshot wound to the upper abdomen. She had lost a significant amount of blood. Her right hand still clutched the grip of a .38 special revolver. The cylinder contained 3 spent rounds and 2 remaining. She was not moving, but she was still alive. Darrell Wilson was found a few feet away, bleeding from his right hand and upper thigh. He was conscious, attempting to apply pressure to his wounds using a dish towel. He had been shot at close range but managed to return fire with a legally owned 9mm handgun he kept in a drawer under the sink. Verified later by both prints and recovered casing. Paramedics transported both individuals to Lake Cumberland Regional Hospital under police escort. Angela Gosser was pronounced dead on arrival at 8:05 p.m. due to internal bleeding and organ failure. Darrell Wilson survived, undergoing surgery for a shattered index metacarpal and a non-fatal femoral laceration. His injuries required long-term rehabilitation, including partial amputation of 2 fingers on his dominant hand. The interior crime scene was processed by the Kentucky State Police Critical Incident Response Team. Their findings would cement the narrative that had begun forming since Larry Gosser's death 48 hours earlier. Angela Gosser had entered her brother's home armed. There were no signs of forced entry, suggesting she either knocked or used a key, something the family confirmed she once had access to. Investigators found no physical barriers blocking her path. The confrontation was brief and escalated rapidly. Blood spatter patterns indicated that Angela fired first. 2 rounds discharged from near the center of the living room. One struck Darrell in the hand as he raised it defensively. The second struck him in the leg as he turned. Ballistic trajectory confirmed the angles matched witness accounts and Darrell's post-incident interview. The third round was recovered from the far wall, unfired but chambered, ejected during the scuffle. Darrell's counterfire was limited to 1 shot, aimed at Angela's torso. The casing was recovered beneath the sink, consistent with a 9mm Ruger pistol. The bullet was located during autopsy, lodged near Angela's liver. Toxicology showed no drugs or alcohol in Angela's system. The autopsy revealed 1 prior healed rib fracture, no evidence of long-term illness, and no psychiatric medications in her bloodstream. That point, however, would later be contested by medical records indicating a history of anxiety and mood disorders. Some treated, others neglected. Detectives examined the revolver found in Angela's possession. Serial number confirmed it was the same firearm previously registered to her in 2003, originally stored in a locked case at the Gosser residence. Forensics confirmed that the same revolver had been used in both the Larry Gosser and Jennifer Wilson homicides. Ballistic striation, rifling grooves, and partial fingerprint transfer matched across all three incidents. This linked all fatalities in a linear chain with forensic precision. Further digital forensics on Angela's device, finally recovered from her vehicle parked earlier near the Hammond Ridge site, provided limited insight. Most files had not been modified in weeks. However, the search history contained one unsent email draft, last edited on the afternoon of May 3rd. It read, "You think you all won. You were never on my side to begin with." The message was undelivered. Investigators could not determine if it was intended for Jennifer, Daryl, or someone else entirely. In the aftermath, law enforcement reconstructed the sequence of events. May 3rd, 2024. Daughter at 5:15 p.m. Larry Gosser killed at his residence in Pulaski County. May 3rd, 6:30 p.m. Jennifer Wilson murdered in Angela's car off Hammond Ridge Road. May 4th, 7:00 p.m. Angela enters Daryl Wilson's home, initiates armed assault. May 4th, 7 and 10 p.m. Daryl shoots back. Angela mortally wounded. In less than 30 hours, 3 family members were dead. 1 remained alive but permanently injured. This chapter marked the final active crime scene. From here, the case would shift from tactical containment to analytical closure. Investigators moved from responding to violence to explaining it. The full forensic package compiled over the following week would include autopsy photos, ballistic modeling, trajectory overlays, phone tower logs, and GPS data. Together, they would form a clear and brutal timeline. The motives, though, would remain fractured, partially inferred, partially speculated. No confession, no manifest, just impact. And that impact extended far beyond 3 bodies and a shattered hand. Angela Gosser's story would become a cautionary report in law enforcement conferences across Kentucky, a case study on missed warning signs, untreated emotional spirals, and the danger of assuming silence equals stability. Some wounds never appear on the surface, not until they cut through bloodlines. With Angela Gosser declared deceased, investigators transitioned from containment to confirmation. The 3 crime scenes, Pulaski, Hammond Ridge, and Jamestown, had now formed a closed circuit, connected by time, geography, and most importantly, ballistics. The revolver recovered near Angela's body at her brother's residence was the linchpin. It was a Smith & Wesson .38 Special, registered in her name, with a purchase record from 2003. Inside the chamber, 5 slots, 3 spent casings. Forensics confirmed that 2 of those rounds matched the projectiles recovered from Jennifer Wilson's chest and temple. 1 matched the headshot delivered to Larry Gosser. The match was exact, not just caliber but rifling pattern, striation, and microscopic breach markings. This wasn't circumstantial. This was signature. State lab analysis verified no secondary DNA on the revolver. The partial fingerprints, thumb and index, were Angela's. There were no signs it had changed hands in recent weeks. Daryl Wilson's weapon was also tested. The casing recovered from the kitchen floor aligned with the bullet recovered from Angela's abdomen. Entry angle, powder residue, and skin stippling confirmed close-range discharge, consistent with defensive fire. For the first time, the sequence wasn't speculative, it was forensic. Angela left no confession, no manifesto, no text explaining her reasoning. What she left instead was trace evidence. Clean, procedural, definitive. But motive rarely shows up in powder burns, so the case file turned inward. Medical records confirmed what early reports had suggested. Angela had received outpatient treatment for mood instability beginning in 2011. Diagnosed with major depressive disorder, with additional notes describing paranoia, withdrawal, and long-term unresolved familial conflict. Treatment was sporadic. A prescription for a low-dose SSRI had been filled 7 months before the killings. She'd stopped refilling it after a single 30-day supply. That detail didn't predict violence, but it pointed to something that had been building unaddressed. Angela's digital activity during the final week was minimal. No social posts, no financial movement, no recent appointments scheduled. One detail stood out, a Google search from April 30th. How to write a will without a lawyer in Kentucky. It was never acted upon. There was no single trigger that investigators could identify. But there was cumulative strain, personal, emotional, possibly delusional. No evidence suggested she was coerced. There were no outside parties involved, no accomplice, no financial pressure, just a quiet erosion, missed until it wasn't. When families fracture, they rarely explode in an instant. They crack over years. Angela Gosser's descent didn't come with warnings that screamed. It arrived in silence. And then it didn't. From a law enforcement standpoint, this case closed quickly. 3 homicides, 1 surviving witness, and full ballistic alignment. But what stayed behind wasn't procedural. It was a vacuum. Questions without direction, grief with no one left to blame. What broke inside her? Why then? Why all 3? Some files end in answers. This one didn't. By May 6, 2024, the Gosser-Wilson triple homicide case was officially closed from a criminal investigative standpoint. No charges were pending, no suspects outstanding. The central perpetrator, Angela Gosser, was deceased, and the forensic evidence had left no meaningful doubt about the sequence or authorship of events. But while the forensic file was complete, the consequences were not. The surviving brother, Darrell Wilson, was discharged from Lake Cumberland Regional Hospital 4 days after the shooting. His right hand was heavily bandaged, with 2 fingers partially amputated due to ballistic trauma. He would later undergo physical therapy, but full function would not return. Psychological impact was noted immediately. Darrell declined all formal media interviews. He refused restitution support. According to police follow-up notes, he relocated temporarily to Tennessee to stay with extended family. He did not return to his Jamestown property. The house, now empty, was later sold at a loss. Inside, state investigators had left no visible damage, but the emotional residue lingered. Locals began referring to it quietly as the last house in the line, a term referencing not just geography, but lineage. The Wilson-Gosser family was, in practical terms, extinguished. Public response unfolded with a mix of shock and silence. Media coverage remained regional. The lack of a trial, lack of footage, and lack of high-profile conflict limited national interest. But within the law enforcement and mental health communities, the case circulated as a reference file, a disturbing but cleanly documented example of unchecked deterioration. Angela Gosser's behavior was analyzed in post-incident reviews. Internal memos from the Kentucky Behavioral Health Board noted missed intervention points. Her 2011 outpatient evaluation had recommended continued clinical monitoring. No follow-up referrals were confirmed. Her 2023 prescription refill lapse was never flagged, because no law required it. In Kentucky, as in many states, non-compliance with mental health medication is not reportable unless accompanied by active threats or danger to self or others. Angela had never voiced a specific threat. There were no 911 welfare calls, no known psychiatric holds. From a legal standpoint, she had full autonomy. From a social standpoint, she was invisible. The Kentucky State Police released a formal case summary on May 15, 2024. It included a full timeline, recovered ballistic evidence, photographs from each scene, and an appendix on domestic firearm access. The document ran 48 pages and ended with a single sentence. The investigation finds no evidence of involvement by any party other than the deceased Angela Gosser. That finality brought clarity, but not resolution. In the months that followed, state legislators referenced the case during mental health reform hearings. One proposal suggested integrating voluntary psychiatric histories with state-level firearm licensing, offering flagged risk scoring without mandating disqualification. The bill stalled in committee. The story also prompted internal procedural changes within Pulaski County. Law enforcement began issuing internal advisories for households with both prior domestic filings and known firearm access. These were not enforceable restrictions, only cautions, a step short of prevention. The funerals were held separately. Larry Gosser's service took place first, attended by former Fish and Wildlife officers, many in uniform. Jennifer Wilson was memorialized quietly, with few press notices. Angela's burial was handled privately, with no public record of location. At each service, no unified eulogy was given. The family's dissolution was not just emotional, it was structural. There was no common narrative to hold the loss together. Each death was mourned in a different room, under a different roof. This is the part most cases don't document. After the evidence is logged, after the autopsies are filed, what remains is impact. It doesn't make headlines, but it persists, quietly like the warning signs that were never loud enough to stop what came next. Angela Gosser never fit the public's idea of a threat. She wasn't on a watch list, hadn't been charged with domestic violence, and wasn't known to local law enforcement as a volatile presence. And yet, within a 30-hour span, she executed a pattern of targeted family killings across 2 counties, leaving 3 dead, including herself, and 1 permanently injured. To understand what enabled that sequence to unfold unnoticed, investigators had to review Angela's history from an institutional standpoint. The focus now shifted from forensics to missed systems-level indicators, those procedural checkpoints that, individually, didn't trigger response but collectively suggested someone in distress. In 2009, Larry Gosser filed for divorce. Court records from that year referenced a request for a temporary protection order. The filing included language describing Angela as increasingly withdrawn, verbally aggressive, and paranoid about family betrayal. The order was dropped within 3 weeks, reportedly after a private reconciliation. No criminal charge accompanied the filing. That meant nothing entered NCIC or state behavioral registries. From a legal view, it vanished. In 2011, Angela enrolled in a voluntary outpatient program at a regional mental health clinic in Lexington. Her intake interview documented signs of major depressive disorder and episodes of elevated suspicion. She completed 5 sessions before terminating treatment. No follow-up occurred, and no red flag was issued because the state didn't require tracking for voluntary disengagement. A private provider prescribed her sertraline in mid-2023. She filled the prescription once. No refill followed. The pharmacy system noted the lapse but had no obligation to alert any external body. Kentucky, like most states, doesn't link mental health prescription adherence to any form of firearm review or wellness check unless tied to a criminal referral. Angela also held a valid concealed carry permit. It had been renewed without issue. Her record remained clean. She passed the background check each time. No alerts, no suspensions, no complaints. What did exist, but never crossed into enforcement channels, was a subtle but observable withdrawal from her community. Neighbors interviewed after the murders described a woman who kept to herself more, no longer came to church, and talked less about her family. But none had ever seen or heard anything alarming. No screaming, no visible agitation, no threats made in public. Digital analysis filled in some missing behavioral context. On her phone, one recurring pattern stood out. Angela had frequently visited obituary pages for local families, especially ones connected to her maiden name. In the 12 months before the killings, she read through over 40 separate obituaries, none directly involving immediate relatives. Analysts couldn't determine whether this was grief-based or obsessive behavior, but it marked a pattern of cognitive focus on death and loss. In her email drafts folder, she had started, then abandoned, multiple messages addressed to no one. Phrases like, "No one ever listened," "You took everything," and "I stayed silent too long," appeared more than once. None were sent, no dates were attached. The drafts existed outside of a communicative loop, just stored weight. She didn't write a will. She didn't write a goodbye note. She didn't delete her social media accounts. She didn't try to escape. She didn't even disable her location tracking until the moment she left the first crime scene. There was no evidence of coercion, delusion, or religious extremism. There was only control, methodical, linear, and precise. From a law enforcement perspective, this case forced an uncomfortable truth to the surface. Angela Gosser did not fall through cracks in the system. There were no cracks for her to fall through. The system never touched her at all. No criminal record, no psychiatric hold, no legal reason to stop her from purchasing, possessing, or carrying a firearm. She did not check any of the state's existing boxes for imminent threat. By the time she became one, it was too late. The challenge here wasn't about negligence. It was about scope. Systems designed to protect others from harm rely on observable, reportable conduct. Angela Gosser's descent didn't leave external evidence until it turned fatal. It remains unclear whether earlier intervention would have changed the outcome. What is clear, Angela's instability wasn't sudden. It was slow, quiet, and uninterrupted. And when that kind of decline isn't noticed or addressed, it rarely ends with conversation. By June 3rd, 2025, the case was closed. Angela Schaefer had been confirmed as the sole perpetrator in the homicides of her daughter Ruby Schaefer and ex-husband Daryl Schaefer. No trial would follow. Angela died by suicide shortly after the killings, leaving no confession, no explanation. But the evidence was overwhelming and conclusive. Ballistics confirmed both victims were shot with the same legally purchased firearm registered to Angela. Surveillance footage and GPS data tracked her movements from Daryl's apartment to her own home. Phone pings aligned with the timeline. She had planned the sequence with precision. Toxicology showed no substances in her system. There were no signs of mental illness documented in her medical records. She had been prescribed antidepressants years earlier, but had stopped taking them without follow-up. There were no police reports, no restraining orders, no alerts in the system. To the outside world, she functioned normally until she didn't. What followed was a quiet audit of systemic failures. School staff had noted Ruby's behavioral changes. Daryl had expressed growing concern in texts, but in the absence of visible abuse or legal cause, no intervention took place. Agencies failed to connect the subtle signs: a mother's paranoia, a child's withdrawal, a father's worry. Angela's emails, reviewed post-mortem, reflected growing delusions. She feared Ruby would leave her. She believed Daryl was turning Ruby against her. No one saw the breaking point coming. A memorial for Ruby was held days later. The community grieved, confused, and heartbroken. There were no satisfying answers, only a trail of missed chances, and a child who never got to grow up. In the end, this story isn't just about loss. It's a reminder of what can slip through the cracks when silence replaces action. As someone who's seen the aftermath, I urge you, don't dismiss the signs. A child's quiet withdrawal, a parent's growing instability, these aren't just private matters. They are calls to intervene. We owe it to each other to speak up, to stay connected, to protect those who can't protect themselves. What would you have done differently if you saw this unfolding around you? Have you ever noticed something that didn't feel right, but stayed silent? If this story moved you, please share your thoughts in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. And if you believe in stories that shine a light on real lives, subscribe to this channel so you never miss what comes next.